Hello and thank you for joining the webinar today. My name is Timothy McDaniel. I'm a sales engineer at Ranorex and I will be presenting today's webinar. A few housekeeping items today before we begin. Throughout the webinar, we will be answering questions in the Q&A panel. It is usually located in the upper right corner of the GoToWebinar window. Also, please note that this webinar is being recorded so that you can watch it again later or share it with others on your team. And here is our agenda for today. Creating a web test solution using the Ranorex Studio Solution Wizard, and then instrumenting your browser with the Instrumentation Wizard, how to record, create, and structure a web test, executing a web test, and how to handle dynamic identifiers in web pages, timing issues in web testing, and how to expand a single browser test to a cross-browser test. So to get started here, we open up the Ranorex Studio, which I have open on the screen here. And when you first open Ranorex Studio, it provides you with a screen that highlights different articles as it relates to UI testing and also some Ranorex specific information such as release highlights for Ranorex 10.0, which just came out recently. We also have some videos on getting started, discuss the features. We advertise our monthly webinars on this screen. And in addition to that, we have some sample solutions to help get started. To help you get started, we have your recent solutions here when you create different solutions, just like in other like Word or Excel or something where they show recent files. Well, you'll see your recent solutions listed here that you can click on and quickly access. Then we have new solution via wizard, new blank solution, and open solution. So open solution, if it's not listed down in the recent solutions, you can open solution and it'll open up a window for you to navigate to your studio project that you're working on. So what we're going to do though is we're going to start with the new solution via wizard. In here we have different choices. We have for desktop, for web, for mobile, or a blank solution. And since this webinar is concerning web testing, we're going to choose the web option. So we will click on that. So the first thing we will do here is change the solution name to something else besides the default. It kind of defaults out to my test whatever, and right now I'm incremented up to a certain degree. So we are going to change that to browser test. And it has a location established here. This location is the default location. I have the option to browse and change that to another folder if I wish to, but we're going to keep it the same. Then from here, there are different options for which browser that you want to begin your test in. So what we will do is we will start it off in Firefox, and then later on we're going to expand this to different browsers. But for right now, we will choose Firefox. And for our website that we're going to test, we're going to run a test today using, for demo purposes, we're going to use the Dropbox website. And I will discuss what the test will be, but for now, we will change this to dropbox.com, log in. And once you've selected those options, we can say, we will launch the browser automatically, uncheck if the browser is already running. And then from here, there's an option to add the browsers to the whitelist, or add your browsers to it, accept the supported browsers, or we could say, we do not want to use whitelisting. And when we do that, it's going to look at everything, all sorts of different processes. And for best practices as it pertains to browser recording, we will go ahead and add the browser to the whitelist so that it's only focusing on the browsers, and Ranorex isn't focusing on other objects or other processes that are running. So we'll select that one and continue. At this point, it's giving me a summary of what's going to transpire. We're about to finish here, and it's going to tell you that a tutorial panel is going to open. We say finish here. At that point, it opens up to the website that we cited earlier in the wizard, and it sets up a little menu system here on the end, or first steps. We're going to go ahead and turn that off for now, since for the webinar we'll gain a little bit more screen real estate. But if you're on your own and you need those first steps to help you get started, you can always go to View and turn it back on under First Steps in Ranorex Studio. So now we're in the studio, and we have several different things in here. We have the Projects panel. The Projects panel lists all the files that pertain to our particular test. We have the Solution Items folder. We have the Browser Test here. There's the Browser Test suite, or the test suite here, and then we have different modules that it already created, little recording modules. These recording modules here you can see also in our module browser, and this module browser is kind of showing us that there's 3 automatically created because we use the wizard. If we would have used a blank solution, then we wouldn't have this open browser, close browser. But for getting started, when you're getting started with Ranorex, the nice thing about using the wizard is that it does set up this structure for you. It sets up the setup for setting up your test, your application under test, which is this browser. And at the end, it sets it up to tear it down, and then it sets up a default recording module. If we look under the open browser, we can see here the action of what it's performing. It's opening the browser and it's logging in and it's going to Firefox. But I'm really getting ahead of myself here because, first of all, I do want to finish explaining some of the different things here. What we have, of course, this is where all your test suite and your test cases are set up. You can have multiple test cases here, and you can build them out. And of course, you can break them into different modules, which I will show you, and that gives you the ability to reuse those pieces for different types of test cases. So in the recording module, the default recorder, we have this panel here that lists all the different actions, and right now there's nothing here. It's empty because we haven't really recorded anything, and the only thing that's in our module repository is the application that's under test, because we basically selected it for it to open this website, and it conducted that when we finished the wizard, so it added this to the repository. This will expand as we begin our recording. And down here, let's pull this up a little bit, is your output console, where you can see what's transpiring when it's compiling your test, and everything that you're doing here when you start executing or doing a build or anything, that's represented down here. And if there's errors or anything, you'll see that. You'll see that, and also when it launches the window of when you attempt to run it. So let's go ahead and get started. But before we get started, let me show you what we're going to do. We're going to go down here to the browser. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to basically log into the website, and we're going to log into this website, and once we get into the website, we are going to do a validation. So just to go through a real quick dry run, let me show you. So we're going to type in Ranorex demonstration at gmail.com. We are going to put in the password, which is pretty long, and I went ahead and did a copy paste on that for convenience here. And then click this, uncheck the Remember Me, click the Sign In button, and once we log in here as John Doe. What we want to do is perform a validation that this is indeed, the right account, John Doe. So after we do that, after we perform our validation check, then we are going to sign out. So it is a very short test, but it will give us an example of performing a short test for logging in, performing that validation, and then we will later expand that into other browsers instead of just Firefox. So to begin, let's go ahead and click on the record button. And what you're going to see here is that it's highlighting the different elements. You see the different elements that are listed here. And as long as it's accurately being able to focus on the different things and it's not looking at the menu items, it's just basically looking at the website, then that means it is working. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say, okay, for email, like we said before, we click in that field. You will see that it shows that I clicked on this field, and if we highlight it, it just shows, it shows a screenshot of what I just did. So I'm going to type in here now, and I'm going to say Ranorex demonstration @gmail.com. We'll tab down here and we will type in the password. For this one, I'm just going to actually paste it in, which we're going to correct in our recording in a second. And then I'm going to uncheck the Remember Me, and we will say sign in. After signing in, then this screen appears where you're logged into Dropbox. And now what we want to do is we want to click over here onto this profile name. That opens up. And at that point, we're going to switch to Validate. And if you notice, it changes to a different color. So we can highlight whichever element that we want to validate, and we're going to validate John Doe here. So we click on it, and then the validation box comes up. It kind of shows us the path structure that it found to get to this location. And then the next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and hit the next button, or actually we can click to retrieve to make sure that it is John Doe, and we can see that's John Doe here. We go over here and say next text. We have some attributes, all the different attributes that relates to John Doe. And right here it shows that, okay, it exists, but we also want to validate the inner text. So we're going to say, okay, let's validate the inner text of John Doe. And we say, okay. At that point, it changes back to the recording mode. And you will notice here that we have validate attribute equals inner text equals John Doe. So that's what we're validating. We've captured a number of different steps here. So the last step, what we're going to do is sign out. Click in sign out, takes us back to the login screen, and at that point we will go ahead and stop our test. So if you notice here, we've got a number of different items, and our repository, element repository down here has grown with all the different things that we clicked on. And every click links down to the repository. So mouse, we clicked on login email. You see it highlighted it down there. We type in key sequence, and the key sequence is also part of that. You'll notice that Ranorex demonstration, due to typing, you've got all these like left shift key down, everything. Well, if I want to make that look a little bit cleaner, I can go ahead and just correct that, and what we'll do is just leave what's important. Ranorex demonstration @gmail.com. Click on the mouse button. The next click was on the password field. And if you remember here, I did a Control V just to paste it in. Well, what we want to do is go ahead and actually change instead and have the actual keyboard entry in, because if we rely on a key shortcut, if I do a Control-C, I copy something else to the clipboard, then that's going to mess this all up, or the clipboard might be empty, and this test would fail if it's not currently in the clipboard. So for convenience of the recording, I did that, but this is another action that's really easy to do. And if you notice down here, it links down to this login password. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag that up here to underneath the key shortcut. And we're going to say that we want to do a key sequence. And the key sequence, of course, is going to be the password. And of course, you can see really quick here as to why I did not want to type that password in, because it's pretty lengthy right here. And I can go into this property here too, and I can say go to properties of this, and I can mask that if I'd like to. So we'll say true, and the password is masked as well. So we have the key sequence, and we have the click. We do not need this one anymore. So at that point, I can either disable it or I could delete it. I'm going to opt to delete it because I don't anticipate needing that again. So now we've got those, and we've got our different clicks here. We've got the uncheck for the remember. We've got the sign in button to sign in, and it's looking at the profile, and it's doing a validation on it, on John Doe to validate, and after that we are signing out. So this is the test, and what we can do now is go ahead and run this test and see if it's going to work as we anticipate it will. In this sense, since I'm going to go ahead and have the browser launch, or have Ranorex launch the test, I'm going to go ahead and just close this website out. And now we are ready to go ahead and run this test. And actually I'm seeing something in the repository that's probably going to prevent it from executing, but just so that you can even see this. So this is going to fail, and we're going to kind of abort this midways. I just want to go ahead and run it though, just so that you see and get a good idea, and this will help you, perhaps help you when you are recording your test. So let's go ahead and run this. You can run it from here, you can run it from here as well. And just to note too, because this is valuable information, is you can also just run the recording. Now, running just the recording though means that you're only running this particular one down here. You're not running the entire test. But that can be good for when you're working on creating your test. You just have to make sure that you're staging the browser at the right place. Like, in other words, in this instance, well, if I decided to run it from within here, I would have to make sure that the browser is already open and it's on the page that I want it to start. And if I was already logged in and I was trying to test just some of the successive things after I logged in, then I would want to maybe run from here. I can right click and I can say run from here, or I could even say that I want to run just selected options. So those are some neat tricks here. We're going to run we want to run the entire test suite here, so we're going to hit run, and let's go ahead and launch it. And it's launching, and you notice it's not appearing to try to find, it's not finding the login email. Down here it says searching item login email, and there's a timer here trying to find it, and it's not finding it. And I will show you why, and we're going to go ahead and then just kind of stop this test here. And it failed, especially it says, you know, that the test has been aborted by the user, which was me. And let's get into here and see what we can do to fix that. Down here we have these forms here. Now this here, of course, is your repository path, your RX path, and you do want to be careful with messing with these things. But anytime you see these failures occur, And sometimes it would work for one browser, but then the next browser it would not work for. So this is something you kind of want to get rid of, and that's these little form elements here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete everything that's pertaining to that form out of there. So we're going to say, go ahead and check this. I think we got one more character. There you go. Actually, no, one less character. There you go. And then we're going to do the same thing with this one. We want to get rid of the form, so we're going to edit this field. And we're doing the same thing up to this little div 2. And then we will do the same thing with the this login email here. We'll go over here where the form starts. Delete that out. And let's see, what else do we have here? We've got a form here. So we're getting rid of these things. Once they're edited out of there, out of the path, we can go ahead and then run the test again. So I think those are the ones that really we need to pertain ourselves with. So we will go ahead and attempt to rerun the test. Okay, so now after making those changes, let's click the run button. And again, you can run it from here. We can run it from here. So this time we'll run it from here. And we will see it go through, going to the site, typing in the password, and then it unchecks remember me. It comes in here, does a validation, and then logs out. So let's see right here, if we expand the details on this, it shows you exactly what it did, that it opened the browser, and then it went through the different steps, clicked on the application that was under test, and each sequence that it entered the email address, and then it typed in the password, and then it went down and it unchecked the remember me, and then it signed in, it did the validation did equal, and it worked. It was correct. Everything worked like it's supposed to, which is perfect. Now let's say, especially with that validation piece, let's say for some reason it was not John Doe. Let's say instead of John Doe, we find out that the inner text says something else. Let's say if it says here, and we say it to like Mary Jane. Now what will happen there, and if we run this, and we'll run it real quick just to kind of as a proof of concept here, we're just showing what happens and what transpires when it fails. So the browser launches, it's logging in like it normally does, unchecking, signing in, and then it's going to attempt to do the validation. You see there's a little hesitancy there, and we got some red here, and that indicates that it failed. And why did it fail? Well, we'll expand the details. I mean, not everything failed in the test. You can see by this meter here, it's telling you, the different things here. But if we look at the expand details here, it shows that the attribute inner text of element for item repository John Doe does not match the expected Mary Jane. So as a result, the validation failed. So we're going to go back to this recording tab and take a look at some of the organization that we could do with our little test case to make it conform to be better organized, and maybe some possibilities for reuse of certain things as well. So for example, application under test is not really that descriptive. So what we can say is Dropbox login. We can even call it Dropbox login test, for example. And we can, and anything you change over here is fine. It's just where you have to be careful, and we did make some changes here. You know, removing some of the forms, those form entries that were part of the Ranorex path. But over here, anything you change doesn't really matter. These are just little names, so we can say anything that we, you know, whatever we wanted to call certain things, we could do that. Say sign in. We could call this, just to let, you know, if we wanted to make sure that we knew what this was, we could call it button sign in. Maybe just say BTN, short for button. And we can say checkbox, remember me. And you will see too, when you do that, it actually changes it up here as well. So on the line of the action, it just helps things to be a little bit more organized. We could call this a field, login email. And there's no absolute rules about this. These are just some examples to show you where you could change things to organize your repository and make it more logical for your use. You know, sign out too, we can say that's a button, right? That's button sign out. I think we were using some abbreviations. We'll use that one there. Be consistent. John Doe, that's nothing really we need to click on. But if you notice here, you can basically organize this thing and make it something that's more sensible to you. The other thing to consider is right now, and of course this is not an expansive test, this is a very short test, but tests in the real world could really get very lengthy. So sometimes you want to break them up, and you want to make it where it's more idea for reusing in other test instances. So right here we've got certain things that we could basically you know, go ahead and arrange in here, that we could basically divide this up into different recording modules so that we can reuse them later. And here's some examples. So let's take these two here. This is for the username, and we'll add that to, we'll move it to a new recording module. You just highlight them, right click, move to new recording module. We'll call this, let me see, username, and say create. And when I do that, it creates another recording module called username. It puts in its own little area. Now we're going to do the password. We'll highlight these two, and we'll say move to new recording module. We'll call that password. And we will go back to the recording module again, and we will say, you know, we can close this properties panel as well. But we go over here, we've got remember me, so we can say, okay, yeah, we're gonna say, make that one move to a new recording module of remember me checkbox. Let's go back. We've got the sign in, so that one can be in its own as well. You see we have a list of them growing over there from the different ones we've created. And then we're going to skip those two for now, and we're going to go to just the sign out, and we'll move it to its own new recording module. We'll call that sign out. Create. And the only thing left here, of course, in the recording module is the recording one itself. I'm going to just save everything that we've done so far. Now we're going to go to the recording. The recording, we're not going to move these two out because, you know, there's just two items in there. This is the basically to validate. It's the validate portion for John Doe. So we're just going to rename that validate name, or validate user maybe. Validate user. There we go. Now, when it gets cluttered up here, you know, it's like you have too many open tabs, like browser tabs or something. We can go ahead and just go to this tab, this tab that we want to be on, and we can say close all but this. If you right click on it, and that way you kind of close out everything else so it doesn't look as cluttered. You can actually close them one by one too, but you know, that's a quick way to do it. If you notice here, our test is a little bit different now. We've got validate user. So what we want to do is go ahead and sort of put these modules back in their proper order. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to, let's see, we're going to put in our username. We are going to, then we're going to put in our password. And after that, we are going to uncheck the Remember Me checkbox, and then we're going to sign in. At that point, it's going to validate the user, and then it's going to sign out. And down here, afterwards, it's going to close the browser. So we've sort of recreated this test structure into different components, and this makes better sense in the idea, especially if you wanted to build additional test cases where maybe you had to do some of the similar things, but you needed to create a new recording module for perhaps a different user ID or different password that you needed to use, or you needed to validate on a different name. And speaking of validating the user, we need to make sure that we change that inner text here, Mary Jane, back to John Doe, so it will pass the validation this time. So let's go ahead and make sure we saved everything. So let's go ahead and run it now that we've restructured it, just to make sure that everything is working as we anticipate it should. So let's run. Windows coming up, it's launching the browser, the Firefox browser, and logging in. And then at that point, it signs out, and it passed this time because the validation was correct and it equals, does match the specified value. Okay, so now that we've done this, what we want to do is, first of all, let's open the browser, and we're just going to check this in one more browser before we set up a browser test that tests all through them. And of course, one way you could manually do this is go to a different browser and run a check for it. Let's go ahead and minimize this reports folder. All right, let's go ahead and run it using Chrome and see if it acts like Firefox does as far as ensuring that it works. Let's see. So it's launching the Chrome browser this time, and it still finds it, logs in, unchecks. Runs the validation, and it was successful as well. Everything went perfectly through, so that works. Okay, so now what we're going to do is you take a look at this. You've got your browser types, right? But one of the browser options of choosing a browser is to establish a new variable. So we can say that we want to put a variable here, and we're going to call this VAR browser. Now a variable holds the place for the browser. And if we go to our browser test, you'll see that we have an unbound variable here. So what we need to do is go ahead and bind this variable, and one thing we need is a data source. So if we right click on test case and select data source, we have the choice of course, we can add a simple data table, we can add a CSV connector, Excel connector, SQL connector. We're talking about a few, browser types, so a simple data table should suffice for that. We're going to call this browser list. And we will come here to the column and we'll call this browsers. And down here we can say, okay, we're going to, we'll start off with Firefox. And then we will go to Chrome. And then last of all, we will use Edge Chromium. We'll use these three. And you'll notice here, and this, this of course we're using variables for browsers, but when you start doing data-driven tests for other type sources, you do have the ability to limit ranges. We could say, well, we only want to test one, the first two, or 1 and 3. This is especially if you have lots of records, but that's just something to note, kind of a side conversation there, right? Let's go over to the data binding, and under data binding, under the variable, we can select Open Browser. That is the VAR browser option that we created, and we'll say Apply. Okay. And now we've got this bound, and we will see whether or not our cross-browser testing works correctly. Clicking Run, and the first one should be Firefox. It's logging in. And now it's going to the next browser, to Chrome. Doing the validation. And finally, Edge Chromium. There we go. So it completed the test, says it was all successful. If we expand the test containers, or expand details, we've got 3 test cases. Test case, the first one, it tells you it's Firefox. We move on down here to the second one. Let me see. Where's the next one? Test case 2, we went to Chrome. And then we went to the other test case, and this was Edge Chromium. And it successfully validated and ran the test across all 3 browser instances. Something to consider when you're doing these browser tests or any sort of recording test that you're creating, but especially sometimes as it pertains to the internet, there are times when, for example, we noticed when we were launching, let me see, let's launch the sign-in, for example. The sign-in, you click on the sign-in, and after you click the sign on it, it takes a while for it to actually log in. You saw the hesitancy, and some websites might have a little bit of difficulty and you're waiting for something to load, and maybe something has to appear before it should continue. So we know that once we sign in on this one, the next step after that is the validation piece. And so under the validation, we click on JD, and then we basically continue. Well, we could put, of course, if we wanted to, we could add, very simple, if you needed additional time, you could sit there and say, okay, I want to put a delay in there. So you have a delay, and that's very simple. And we can move this up to the top above the mouse, and we could add a couple seconds in if we wanted to, let's say, 3 additional seconds. And you could put that in, and that would allow you those 3 additional seconds to make sure that everything is loaded on the page. The other option is, instead of using a delay, and we'll delete this one, we also have the option to use a wait for. And you can add an option, say wait for, see, that's the wait for option, but the easiest way to do this, let me expand this again, and we've got to validate the John Doe here. Let's see, yeah, we can sit there and use probably this one right here, and we can say, okay, what we want to do is we're going to drag this up, and we want to say wait for, and we're not waiting for this not to exist, we're waiting for this to exist. So that's what we want to do. We want to basically say wait for exist in order to give it the capability, give it time in order to appear. And we can even change this timer here to give it some additional time for that one, and say 10 seconds or something like that to give it time. Now, what does that mean? You're like, well, you've got time specified here, so why don't I just use a delay? Because this is sort of the timeout feature for it, but it's not going to set that static delay in where you have so many seconds that have to transpire before it continues. If it appears sooner, it's going to still go ahead and continue logging in. But if it's if it's longer than 10 seconds, then of course it will still time out. And that can be adjusted if if you're in an environment where things are running like pond water, so to speak. Well, then you can go ahead and set that timer up there a little bit higher in order to let it have a chance for that item to appear. Now, without getting too much in the weeds, what we want to do is just briefly mention the dynamic IDs that could occur, because that could be a stumbling block if you run into that. This, of course, is the level of this webinar is more entry level, so we don't want to go too deeply into that situation for this particular webinar. But when it comes to dynamic IDs, it means basically that the IDs are changing constantly. So every time that you attempt to log in, or if you're running your recording and that element changes to something dynamic, well, your Ranorex has basically difficulty in tracking that. So you have to basically choose something better, something alternative that it could track on, and that might have to do with adjusting the weights and things and conditions and setting conditions, which really there's a topic about, and that's under the Studio Expert, but it discusses about the weight rules and what they are and how you would adjust those and add your own weight rules and put that in your, basically add that shared weight, Ranorex weight rule, so that you could try to make sure that you don't run into trouble with dynamic identifiers. That setting in particular, of course, I would first refer you to our guide under support. You'd go to support and go to the help center, and in the help center under the, let me just guide you to it right now. Under the Studio User Guide, right here, we've got Expert, and then you get into basically dealing with dynamic UI elements and all of those things. So that's how you would get there. And in Ranorex itself, there is a, under the Advanced tab, then you can edit your attribute weights, and that works hand in hand. But You do want to be careful when applying these and when to use them and when not. So if you're going to go delve into that, and it's when you might have to if you have a situation where that's required, you do want to look at that portion of the manual, so the online manual, so that you have a good understanding of it. Now finally, let's speak of something else, okay? Let's also talk about instrumentation. Now instrumentation, if we go over here, we have the instrumentation wizard. And the instrumentation wizard looks a little different than it did before version 10. Version 10, they added some new features, especially as it pertains to the Android and iOS wizard or instrumentation wizard and how those are handled. But also for instrumenting a browser, if we click in here, and what that means is essentially adding a Ranorex extension, or I guess you could say if it's Chrome, they consider it an extension. If it's Firefox, it's considered an add-on. So they all have like different type of verbiage for it, but essentially this allows it to interact with and be able to read the elements. So it is something that's required, and if you are attempting to record and you're finding that it's not tracking the elements as it should, then you do need to make sure that it is instrumented. When you click on this, it will tell you, it checks and lets you know whether or not it's already instrumented. If you see mine, pretty much everything shows it's instrumented. IE is sort of, as long as it exists, it's currently instrumented by default, so you don't have to do anything there. But when it comes to Chromium or Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, and Microsoft Edge, you would need to do that, and of course restart any of the instrumented browsers for that change to take effect. Another thing that you do need to note is you cannot have any of these Chromium browsers, like Edge Chromium or like Edge Chromium and Chromium Edge, anything that's Chromium or Chrome, they're going to conflict with each other, and you will see it when you're trying to record. If you have both of them open at the same time when you're trying to do your recording, then you will see that the bounding box, the recording box, is off-centered and you can't seem to record correctly, and they're conflicting with each other. And that also applies if you just think that you closed it and it's actually running in your system tray, so to speak. So for example, and the way that you take care of that is, of course, you can kill them in Task Manager, but the more effective way is to go into your settings. So if we go into the settings here, this is Microsoft Edge, and I think I go into, let me see, settings, and I go into system, and I look at my, under here, continue running background extension apps when Microsoft Edge is closed. You want that to be off. If it's turned on, then it's going to be running in the background, and it might cause your test in Chrome to fail, or Chromium if you're running, if you have Chromium in your environment as well. So you want to make sure that's not running there. This is where it's located here. I think if I go into Chrome itself, let me type in Chrome. Let's go to settings here, and you go into advanced and go into system. Continue running background apps when Google Chrome is closed. You want that turned off. That will cause problems. That problem does not exist when it pertains to Firefox, because Firefox doesn't have that issue, but these other browsers, it does. So something to consider. Like I said too, when you're running the extensions here, you'll see that you have the Ranorex automation extension running, and if you don't see this here, or if it's not turned on or something like that, then of course you're not instrumented, and Ranorex will tell you. And it's just as simple as turning the switch on and going next, and it will add the extension if you're missing it. But that's one compelling thing to consider when doing browser testing. If you would like to explore the many features of Ranorex Studio, but you're not yet a user, you can download a free 30-day trial of Ranorex Studio from the website at www.ranorex.com. Now let's move on to the Q&A session. There were a few questions. One was asking to reiterate where, where would you mask your password, or, to kind of show that again. So right here, if we go to this key sequence and, to this particular line, you go into properties and you see right here, mask sequence. Right there, you can change it from true or false, and you're able to kind of change whether it's going to reveal that key sequence. And of course, that's, any key sequence that you do, you can mask. And you can also, one of the other questions was about, well, what about, a data-driven test where the password is, provided via, let's say, a CSV file or a spreadsheet or something like that. So if we go over here to, let me see, where was the main thing here? Browser test, RxTXT, and we look at our data-driven test, our data source. And when you do your data source from your data source, this browser list right here, we could mask any of the, we could say, okay, well, we want to mask browsers. We do not want to show the browser or something in the list. And then, of course, if we did that and you execute your test, when you have the report, and you've got these reports here, let's see if we can find, I'll go to this one. Let's expand the details. What would occur then is, of course, this would be masked. You wouldn't be able to see it. It would be just like the password here. You would just have a bunch of dots going across the screen, and showing that that is the situation. And by the way, the password is changed in Dropbox here. So if anyone tries to log into it, it's not going to be the same password. But anyways, if you let's see what else we got here on the questions. Let me see here. Things to here. Show answered. Let's see. The question about, will Ranorex run on a Mac OS? No, it will not. If you want to run Ranorex in that situation, you would have to use something like Boot Camp. You could run a virtual machine, and you could, if you're running like VMware inside your Mac OS or something like that, you might be able to run Windows. But then again, you're running on Windows. You're not, this is a .NET application, so it pretty much requires Windows to be able to run on. And let's see, how many modules can you have? Browser test. Let's see. Trying to look at the answers here. Does Ranorex now run in Edge? It runs pretty much in Edge Chromium. That's pretty much the what Microsoft has switched to. And even though Internet Explorer is still supported, and I guess it will be supported as long as it exists. But if you go into Internet Explorer here, and if we look into the add-ons, you will see, even though it's not in the list of those to be instrumented, it automatically adds the plugin that's necessary for Internet Explorer to work. So until they really do get rid of the product, it is still available there. And then, of course, Edge Chromium is Chromium based, and it will continue to work as well. Just remember, as stated, that you don't want to run both of them at the same time, because if you try to run both of these browsers at the same time, tend to conflict with each other. It will mess up your recording. And so one of the first indicators of that is if you know you've got your browsers implemented correctly, or they're instrumented correctly, but you're having conflicts, then that's the first thing to check, because that's a common issue that occurs. Let me see here. What else we got here? Could you please an example in a mobile test on that one? Mobile test, we do support, we do support Android and we do support iOS for testing. However, this particular webinar was focused on cross-browser testing. You could look at our webinar list, and there may already still be one in our list, but if not, forthcoming in some of the upcoming webinars that we have. I think there is planned for in the next several months or so for there to be a webinar talking to that subject, and where we will go more into the mobile testing and show you how that's done. It's really similar in many respects to however you're doing it for a web browser. The only difference is, instead of using your mouse or keyboard sequences and things like that, you're going to be using touch a lot and swipe gestures, things like that. And you really work with capturing the repository items using the spy tool, and then you add them to your repository and you add those actions there. It's done a little bit differently, but the end result is sort of the same. And of course, too, you got to make sure even those things where we were talking about the wizard there, you've got to make sure that they're instrumented. And when you upload, let's say, your program like your APK or something, that it is uploaded through the studio. If you just copy an app into your, if you copy or install an app on your device, and then you're trying to use all the mobile, you're trying to do your recording, Ranorex will not be able to see it because it has not been instrumented. It has to be instrumented for that to occur. So there is a whole topic on that and subjects and some things that are on our website. So if that's really a big interest, you can continue to do that. And let's see. Thanks for wait action. Okay, unable to differentiate. One question was about whether or not you could run, can we run this? You've got the recording thing going on, it's playing, but on the other hand, you're trying to do something on another screen. You want to be able to kind of go to your second monitor and be able to work on it. That you can't do. Unfortunately, when Ranorex is taking control, it takes control, and you would be battling your mouse and your keyboard for, against the Ranorex tool, and it would probably just kind of mess up your test, because the test, it's trying to click on something and you grabbed your mouse and try to drag it to your other screen, and that struggle, will probably keep the test from functioning correctly. However, you can, let's say if you're using, let's say, a VM, a virtual machine, you've got an enterprise license or whatever, and you're running that in a VM. Then of course that thing can run on its own. You can go ahead and do something on your own machine at that point, because it's a different computer. It's got its own mouse, it's virtual mouse that's running. It's got its own keyboard that it's using. So it's able to do that, and you have pretty much control of your own computer at that point on doing that. So those are some things, either using that. There could be, you could have a machine that's running Jenkins or Azure DevOps, and those particular machines are performing as continuous integration test, and they're able to launch the test on their machine. So, but basically when it's on your own computer, things like that, then you will be in a, you can't do that, it doesn't work. So really, we're at the top of the hour now, and I do thank you and everyone for attending. be on the lookout for new webinars. Anyone who attended this webinar or registered for this webinar is going to receive a link for that. Someone was asking for, like, I think something about evidence that they attended or something. We'll look for the email and show that you did, that shows that you were, that you signed up for this webinar. Not sure about actually showing that you attended or something, but as far as having evidence that you registered for it and that you have the link and everything, hopefully that's adequate. So anyways, thank you for attending. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.